If anyone asks about your scent tonight, you leave immediately. My mother said it while adjusting the collar of my dress shirt, which was not how I expected my sister's wedding day to begin. Most people got reminders about rings, speeches, or not embarrassing the bride. I got evacuation instructions. That feels reassuring, I said. Mom ignored the sarcasm and pressed 2 fingers against the scent blocker hidden beneath my collarbone. Caleb, I mean it. You usually do. That is part of your charm. Her expression did not change. At 24, I had learned that joking was easier than asking why my family treated me like one strong alpha sent away from a medical emergency. According to every explanation I had ever been given, I was a beta with an unusually sensitive nervous system. Crowded rooms exhausted me. Strong scents caused headaches. Formal pack gatherings required medication, blockers, and enough parental concern to make me feel like fragile luggage. I had stopped arguing years ago, mostly because arguing with my mother was like debating weather. Technically possible, rarely productive. The guest room door opened, and my sister Emily stepped inside wearing her wedding dress, looking so happy that for a second I forgot about the patch, the rules, and the fact that Mom was still inspecting my neck. There you are, Emily said. My favorite brother. I am your only brother. Do not make today about technicalities. She hugged me carefully and then leaned back. You look nervous. Mom just gave me instructions normally reserved for witness protection. Emily looked at her. Again. Mom sighed. Caleb needs to be careful around this many alphas. Emily rolled her eyes affectionately. He is 24. Thank you, I said. Finally, someone has located my birth certificate. Mom gave both of us the same exhausted look. 10 minutes later, we headed downstairs. The Foster estate had been transformed into something almost aggressively elegant. White roses covered the staircase. Sunlight poured through tall windows. Soft piano music floated through the reception hall, while waiters moved between guests carrying champagne. I could already feel the familiar pressure building behind my eyes. Too many people. Too much perfume. Too many alpha scents softened by expensive blockers, but still present beneath everything else. I touched the edge of my collar. The patch was there. Fine. Normal. Emily was called toward the ceremony entrance, leaving me near the ballroom doors. I adjusted my navy jacket and reminded myself that my only job was to smile, avoid family politics, and survive several hours without becoming memorable. Then I noticed him. He stood near Daniel Brooks, Emily's fiancé, speaking with 2 older guests. Tall, probably late 20s, dark brown hair, black suit fitted with the kind of precision that suggested somebody else had paid attention to tailoring. His posture was relaxed. His expression was easy. Then I stepped through the doorway. He stopped speaking. Completely. One of the men beside him continued talking for several seconds before realizing he was no longer being listened to. The stranger's head turned toward me. Slowly, his eyes found mine from across the room. I looked behind myself. Empty doorway. Excellent. So this was definitely happening to me. His expression changed, but not in the way strangers usually looked at strangers. There was no polite curiosity. No confusion. It was recognition. Immediate and unsettling. My chest tightened. Then something even stranger happened. Through roses, champagne, perfume, and dozens of overlapping scents, one smell reached me with impossible clarity. Cedarwood. Cold air after rain. I had never been able to distinguish someone's scent from across a ballroom before. My hand rose instinctively toward the blocker beneath my collar. Across the room, the stranger noticed. His eyes sharpened. Mom appeared beside me and followed my gaze. I felt her body go rigid. Caleb, she whispered. Who is that? I asked. She did not answer. That was answer enough to make my stomach drop. The stranger excused himself from Daniel and started walking toward us. Mom caught my sleeve. Stay here. I am literally already here. Caleb. Her voice sounded different now. Frightened. The man stopped about 6 feet away, close enough that the cedar scent became clearer but far enough that he was obviously giving me space. His gaze moved briefly to my collar, then returned to my face. Adrian Cole, he said, introducing himself, though his expression suggested introductions were somehow unnecessary. Caleb Foster. His eyes softened with something I could not name. I know. My pulse skipped. Mom tightened her grip on my sleeve. I stared at him. Have we met? Adrian did not answer immediately. Instead, he looked once at the hidden blocker and then back into my eyes. Not the way you remember, he said quietly. I wanted to ask Adrian what exactly that meant, but my mother answered for both of us by stepping between us with the kind of polite smile people used when they were one sentence away from panic. "The ceremony is starting," she said. "Caleb, you should take your seat." Adrian looked at her, then back at me. Of course. He did not argue. Somehow that made me more suspicious, not less. I followed Mom toward the front rows while trying to ignore the fact that my heart was beating too fast, and the cedar scent had followed me halfway across the ballroom, even though Adrian had stayed behind. "Do you know him?" I whispered. "Not well." "That is not what your face said." "Caleb." There it was. The family emergency brake. One word, full stop. I sat down before she could deploy another. Emily appeared at the entrance a few minutes later, and for a while, everything else actually disappeared. She smiled at Daniel like the room had become irrelevant. He looked back at her the same way. I was happy for them, truly, which was why I tried very hard not to spend my sister's wedding ceremony wondering why a stranger knew my name and why my mother looked terrified that he did. By the time the reception began, my blocker felt warm. Not painful, just wrong. I touched it through my shirt and frowned. "Do not start," I muttered under my breath, as if adhesive responded to authority. The ballroom filled quickly. Music, glasses clinking, laughter, perfume. Usually, crowded events blurred together into one exhausting wall of scent. Tonight, they separated. Roses near the dance floor. Citrus from someone's drink. Vanilla frosting from the cake. Table. Bourbon from an older man standing at least 15 feet away. I froze. That was new. Very new. Then came cedar again. I turned without thinking. Adrian stood across the room speaking with Daniel. His head lifted at almost the exact same moment. Our eyes met. Fantastic. Apparently, we had developed synchronized confusion. The warmth beneath my collar increased. I excused myself from a conversation with an aunt whose name I had absolutely forgotten and slipped through the terrace doors. Cool evening air hit my face. Better. I walked toward the stone railing and inhaled slowly, watching strings of lights glow over the gardens below. "You followed me," I said when the door opened behind me. Adrian stopped several feet away. "I did. At least you were honest. You looked uncomfortable. I am at a family wedding. That is basically the dress code." A faint smile touched his face. Then he looked serious again. "How long have you worn blockers like that?" I crossed my arms. "You ask a lot of medical questions for someone I met 12 minutes ago." "How long?" Something in his tone was not demanding. Concerned, maybe. That was worse. "Since I was 13. Adrian's expression changed immediately. "Every day. Most days. Stronger ones for events." He went quiet. I suddenly hated the silence. "What? Who told you that you needed them?" "Doctors. My parents." "Why?" "Because I am a beta with scent sensitivity." Adrian looked at me for several seconds. "Who told you that you were a beta?" I laughed once. "Literally every doctor I have ever met." "Did you ever see the original test?" The question landed strangely. Of course. Then I stopped. Had I? I remembered clinics. Waiting rooms. My parents speaking to specialists behind closed doors. Bottles appearing afterward. Instructions. But an actual report? "Why are you asking me this?" Adrian lowered his voice. "Because I can smell you through the blocker." My stomach tightened. That sounds like a problem with the blocker. "No." Very confident. "Caleb, I know what a failing blocker smells like." He paused. "This is different." The terrace suddenly felt colder. Different how? Adrian did not move closer. "There is an alpha scent underneath it." I stared at him. "No. I know that is not what you were told." "No, I mean no. You are wrong." "Maybe." That surprised me. "Maybe. You do not have to believe me because I said it." His gaze stayed steady. "But somebody lied to you about something, Caleb. And I think your body is starting to tell you before anyone else does." I wanted Adrian to be wrong badly enough that for the next 30 seconds I treated denial like a medical specialty. "An alpha scent," I repeated. "Under my blocker." "Yes." "And you can just tell that?" "Yes." "Convenient." Adrian did not react to the sarcasm. He stayed near the terrace door, several feet away, hands relaxed at his sides. "You do not have to trust me." "That is good, because we are not there yet." "Then do not trust me." "Watch." I frowned. "Watch what?" Before he could answer, the terrace door opened behind him. A man from Daniel's side of the family stepped outside, maybe early 30s, wearing a gray suit and carrying a glass of sparkling water. I remembered him from dinner. Confident voice. Strong alpha presence. At least, that was what my mother would have called it. He glanced at Adrian first and nodded casually. Then he looked at me. His pace slowed, just slightly. His shoulders loosened, and whatever sharp scent had followed him through the doorway softened almost immediately. He moved farther to the opposite side of the terrace than necessary before saying, "Sorry. Did not mean to interrupt." I stared after him. "What was that?" Adrian answered quietly. He reduced his scent. "Maybe he has manners." "Maybe." I looked at him suspiciously. "You are enjoying this." "Not even slightly." Another guest appeared less than a minute later, an older alpha woman I vaguely recognized as one of the Brooks family friends. She stepped outside while checking her phone, looked toward Adrian, then toward me. Her expression changed. Not fear. Not surprise exactly. Recognition without context. She gave me a wider path than the terrace required and lowered her own scent before walking past. My stomach tightened. That happened twice. Yes. That still does not prove anything. No. Could you stop agreeing with me when I am trying to argue? A faint smile appeared. I can try. I turned toward the garden again. My senses felt sharper by the minute. I could smell damp stone beneath the railing, cut grass, roses from the ballroom, lemon from someone's drink inside. None of this was normal for me, except maybe it had always been normal, and something had been preventing me from noticing. That thought was significantly less comforting. Why would other alphas react to me? I asked. Adrian paused before answering. Because scent recognition happens before conscious interpretation sometimes. If your blocker is weakening, they may notice enough of your presence to adjust instinctively. And I never noticed this before because the blocker was probably stronger. I touched the patch through my shirt again. The heat beneath it had become irritating. My mother said this one was supposed to last all day. Then either it is failing early or your scent is becoming harder to suppress. Great. Apparently my body had chosen my sister's wedding to begin filing formal complaints. The door opened again. This time my mother stepped onto the terrace. Her eyes found me first, then Adrian. Every line in her face tightened. "Caleb, I have been looking for you. I have been standing 20 feet outside the ballroom. You need to come inside." "Why?" Her gaze dropped to my collar. "Your patch needs to be replaced." Adrian's expression changed immediately. I looked between them. "How do you know?" Mom blinked. "Know what?" "That it needs replacing." "You look overwhelmed." "I look overwhelmed at every family event. Usually you offer me water and tell me to smile." Her face went still. I touched the patch again. "You said this one would last until tomorrow morning. Sometimes they wear out faster." "Why?" She looked at Adrian. There it was again. That tiny glance toward the person who knew too much. I felt something cold settle beneath my ribs. "Mom," I said slowly, "what exactly is this patch blocking?" "Caleb, this is not the place." Adrian said nothing. He did not need to. My mother's answer had done more damage than his accusation. "Then where is the place?" I asked. Because apparently it was not any doctor's office I went to for 11 years. Her face lost color. I heard myself breathe in. 11 years. I had said it without thinking. 13 to 24. Every morning. Every formal event. Every time someone else handed me something and told me it was necessary. "I need you to come upstairs," Mom said. "No." She stared at me. I had almost never said that word to her without immediately softening it. This time I did not. "I am going upstairs," I said, "but not to replace anything. Caleb, I am going to find the original paperwork." Her expression changed. Fear. Real fear. Adrian stayed exactly where he was. "If I am a beta," I continued, "there should be a record saying I am a beta." Mom opened her mouth. Nothing came out. That silence answered more than I wanted it to. I stepped toward the terrace door. "And if there is not," I said, "then somebody is going to explain why." I left the terrace with my mother following close behind, but I did not slow down. The ballroom music faded as I crossed the hall and climbed the staircase toward the family rooms, my pulse keeping time with every step. I had expected Mom to argue. Instead, she stayed quiet, which was somehow worse. Silence had always been the Foster family version of locking a door. I reached the guest room where I had gotten dressed earlier and went straight to the cabinet beside the mirror. "Where are the records?" I asked. Mom stopped in the doorway. "Caleb, please. That is not a location." I opened the first drawer. Spare cufflinks. Sewing kit. Emergency stain remover. Apparently my family had prepared for every possible wedding disaster except honesty. The second drawer held extra scent blockers in sealed white packets. No clinic name, no prescription label, nothing that explained why I had been wearing them since middle school. Where are they? I asked again. Mom closed the door behind her. Your father keeps the old medical files in the study. Great. I turned toward the hallway. Caleb. Something in her voice stopped me. Not authority this time. Fear. I looked back. She had gone pale. There is something you should see first. She crossed the room slowly and opened the bottom section of an old wooden cabinet near the window. From behind a stack of folded table linens, she pulled out a thin gray document box. My name was written across the top in black ink. Caleb Foster, age 12. I stared at it. You kept this here? Your father wanted it stored away. Clearly he chose an excellent hiding place. Nobody investigates table linens. My hands felt strangely cold as I lifted the lid. Inside were old clinic envelopes, photographs, and a silver pin resting in a small velvet pouch. The symbol on it was unmistakable. Alpha designation. I picked it up carefully. Why is this in my box? Mom did not answer. I opened the first envelope. The paper inside had yellowed slightly at the edges. My name, date of birth, test results. I read the final line once. Then again, primary alpha presentation confirmed. Age 12. The words were perfectly ordinary. That was almost offensive. There should have been thunder, a siren, something. Instead, there was just paper. This says alpha. My voice sounded distant. Mom sat down on the edge of the bed. Yes. I looked at her. Say it. Her eyes filled. Caleb, say it. She swallowed. You presented as an alpha when you were 12. The room became impossibly quiet. I looked back at the document. Then why do I remember being told my results were inconclusive? Because we had them changed later. My head lifted. Changed. Not the original medical result. Your public designation records. I laughed once, because apparently my brain had decided this was a perfectly reasonable time for sarcasm. Good. For a second I thought this might be unethical. Mom flinched. I hated that part of me was glad. When you presented, she said, people started asking questions immediately. Families contacted us. Advisors. Representatives. They wanted meetings about your future. I was 12. I know. Did I know? She hesitated. For a while. Something moved at the edge of my memory. A crowded hotel ballroom. A silver pin on my jacket. Too many scents. Me sitting in a hallway with a bottle of water, wishing everyone would stop looking at me. There was a ceremony. I whispered. Mom stared at me. In Baltimore. You remember that? Pieces. I looked through the photographs. There I was at 12, standing beneath a youth designation banner with the silver alpha pin on my collar. In another picture, I sat alone near a hallway window. At the edge of the frame stood an older teenage boy with dark hair, keeping several feet of distance between us. Something about his posture felt familiar. I brought the photograph closer. Who was that? Mom glanced at it. I do not know. But I did. Not fully. Not yet. Then I found another document dated the following year. Treatment authorization. Scent suppression protocol. Age 13. My stomach dropped. You started suppressing me. Mom closed her eyes. Yes. For 11 years. We thought it was safer. I looked at every appointment date, every renewal, every signed authorization. Safer for who? She stood. For you. At first, it was absolutely for you. At first. The words were quiet. Tiny. Devastating. I looked up slowly. What does that mean? Mom said nothing. You protected me at 12. Fine. You were scared. Fine. But I became an adult 6 years ago. Her gaze moved toward the floor. Why did you keep doing it? The wedding music drifted faintly through the walls. My sister was celebrating downstairs while my mother stood in front of proof that my entire identity had been rewritten. Mom. She finally looked at me. Because things changed. What things? Her face tightened. Emily's engagement. I stared at her. What does my sister getting married have to do with whether I am an alpha? Mom closed her eyes again. And in that second, I realized the lie had never ended because they were afraid of what being an alpha would do to me. It had continued because they were afraid of what the truth would do to them. Emily's engagement? I repeated, because apparently my brain had reached the point where simple words required confirmation. Mom looked toward the closed bedroom door as if Dad might somehow appear and rescue her from the conversation. He did not. The Brooks family has been connected to ours for generations, she said carefully. That sounds like the beginning of something I am going to hate. Caleb, please continue. I am having a wonderful evening. She exhaled slowly. When Emily and Daniel became serious, both families began discussing a formal partnership involving the family trust, shared voting rights, and several properties managed through foster holdings. I stared at her. And somewhere in this extremely romantic wedding story, my hormones become relevant. Her mouth tightened. Your designation does. There was a knock, and Dad entered before I could answer. One look at the open document box told him everything. You showed him. Mom stood. He found it. Dad closed the door behind him. Caleb, we need to explain this properly. That would be refreshing. He glanced at the old clinic report in my hand. When you presented as an alpha, your grandfather's trust changed how certain family decisions would eventually be handled. Changed how? Dad hesitated. The trust contains an old provision requiring the first recognized adult alpha heir to approve any agreement transferring significant foster voting shares outside the family line. I waited, then waited another second because surely there had to be more. You were telling me my designation affects whether Emily's marriage agreement can move foster shares to the Brooks family. The marriage is separate from the business agreement, Dad said quickly. Emily and Daniel love each other. I know they do. That was the worst part. Emily was downstairs having the happiest night of her life, while 3 floors above her, I was discovering my childhood had apparently become an administrative shortcut. Does she know? I asked. Mom shook her head immediately. No. Daniel. No. Relief came so suddenly, I nearly sat down. Emily had not betrayed me. She had simply been living inside the same carefully edited family story I had. When I turned 18, I said, looking at Dad, why did you not tell me? His expression changed. The Brooks discussions had already started. I was 18. You were still figuring out your life. I laughed once. That is traditionally what 18-year-olds do. We believed reopening your designation would bring back the same pressure we had tried to protect you from, and conveniently require my signature. Dad looked away. There it was. I felt something inside me settle, not calm exactly, but clarity. So when I was 12, you hid me because you were scared people would use me. Mom's eyes filled. Yes. And later, you kept hiding me because it became useful. Neither of them answered. I held up the medical file. That is the part you did not want to say. We never stopped loving you, Mom whispered. I looked at her. I believe you. That seemed to hurt more than anger would have. But loving me did not give you permission to decide I should never know myself. Dad stepped closer. Nothing has to change tonight. I stared at him. Everything changed about 20 minutes ago. I mean the wedding. Emily can have her evening. We can discuss the trust tomorrow. I looked toward the window, where strings of wedding lights glowed over the lawn. Music drifted faintly upward. I could almost hear Emily laughing downstairs. I am not ruining her wedding. Both my parents visibly relaxed. That irritated me enough to straighten. Do not look relieved. Dad's face went blank. I am choosing not to hurt Emily. I am not choosing to protect this lie. I touched the edge of the blocker beneath my collar. It felt hotter now, the adhesive beginning to lift against my skin. Mom noticed. We have stronger patches. No. Caleb, there are dozens of alphas downstairs. I know. Your scent could become noticeable. I looked at the alpha designation report again, then at the silver pin resting beside it. For 11 years, I had worn blockers because everyone I trusted said they protected me from something dangerous. Now the dangerous thing seemed to be how easy it had become for other people to decide what I was allowed to know. I am not replacing it, I said. Dad's voice sharpened. That could delay the agreement. I met his eyes. Then the agreement gets delayed. Silence. Beautiful, uncomfortable silence. I slipped the old alpha pin into my pocket and closed the document box. Emily gets her wedding. Tomorrow, I get an independent doctor, my complete records, and every document connected to. That trust. Mom whispered. And if the testing confirms you are an alpha? I touched the loosening patch one last time. Then maybe for once, everyone else gets to wait while I decide what that means. For the first time that night, I left the guest room without asking either of my parents what I was supposed to do next. The hallway felt strangely quiet compared with the reception below, but my senses were not quiet at all. Every step toward the staircase made the world sharper. Flowers from the ballroom, coffee from the catering station, rain beginning somewhere beyond an open window, and beneath all of it, faint but unmistakable, cedar. Adrian. I stopped halfway down the stairs. The blocker at my collar had lifted enough that one corner brushed against my shirt. Mom caught up behind me. Caleb, please think about this. I looked over my shoulder. I have been thinking about it for 11 years. I just did not know what I was thinking about. Dad appeared behind her. You do not need to make a decision tonight. Good. Then nobody else gets to make one either. I kept walking. At the bottom of the stairs, the ballroom opened before me in warm gold light. Emily was laughing with Daniel near the dance floor, completely unaware that her brother had just discovered his childhood came with hidden legal consequences. I was not going to take that moment from her. That much I knew. What I did not know was whether I could keep pretending for another hour. I touched the blocker again. The adhesive gave way almost without resistance. I stared at the small patch between my fingers. Nothing dramatic happened. No sudden transformation. No room going silent. Just cool air against skin that had been covered for years. Then the scents around me changed. Not stronger exactly. Clearer. Layered. Individual. An alpha near the bar paused mid-conversation and glanced toward me. Another guest lowered his scent instinctively as he walked past. An older woman across the room looked from me to my father with an expression that said she understood something before I did. My pulse quickened. Dad leaned close. Put it back on. I looked at him. No. The word came easily this time. Caleb, you said people would notice. I glanced around the room. They already are. Mom whispered, this could affect the agreement. There it was again. Not my health. Not my safety. The agreement. I folded the patch into my palm. Then the agreement can survive being inconvenienced. Before either of them could answer, the cedar scent grew clearer. I turned toward the far side of the ballroom. Adrian was standing near Daniel, but his attention had shifted completely to me. He excused himself and approached without rushing. When he reached us, he stopped several feet away. Always several feet. I was beginning to notice that. You removed it, he said. Temporary lapse in obedience. His eyes flicked toward my parents, then back to me. How do you feel? I almost laughed. Of every question I had been asked tonight, that was the first one about me instead of the consequences around me. Confused. Anything else? I considered it. Lighter. Adrian nodded as though that answer mattered. Dad spoke from behind me. This is a private family issue. Adrian looked at him calmly. Then Caleb should be the person deciding how private it is. I turned toward Adrian. You really do enjoy making my father uncomfortable. That is not the goal. Side benefit? His mouth almost smiled. The tension in my chest loosened slightly. Then Emily appeared beside us, still in her wedding dress, looking from me to Mom to Dad. Okay, she said slowly. Why does everyone look like somebody just canceled the honeymoon? I froze. Mom inhaled. Dad looked toward me. For once, nobody answered first. Emily frowned. Caleb. I looked at my sister, at the happiness still bright in her face, and made the only decision that felt mine. Not tonight, I said. Tonight is yours. Her expression softened. Are you sure? Yes. Then I looked at my parents. But tomorrow is mine. Dad said nothing. I slipped the folded blocker into my pocket beside the old silver alpha pin. Two objects from two different versions of my life. One chosen for me. One hidden from me. Adrian watched the movement, but did not comment. Emily squeezed my arm and returned to Daniel. The music started again. Guests moved. Back toward the dance floor. Life continued. I stood there without the blocker for the first time in 11 years, surrounded by people beginning to recognize something I had never been allowed to name. And through all the uncertainty, one thought felt completely clear. I was done disappearing just because the truth made other people uncomfortable. The reception eventually settled into something almost normal again, which was impressive considering I had spent the last hour discovering that half my childhood had apparently been filed under confidential. Emily was dancing with Daniel. My parents had retreated into the careful silence of people who knew I was not finished asking questions. Adrian stood near one of the tall windows with a glass of water, speaking to an older couple while somehow still noticing every time I looked in his direction. I hated how reassuring that was. I waited until Emily disappeared onto the dance floor again before walking toward him. Adrian excused himself immediately. Everything okay? He asked. Define okay. You were standing upright. Then yes. Thriving. His mouth curved slightly. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the old photograph I had taken from the document box upstairs. I found something. Adrian looked at the picture. His expression changed before I even pointed. You remember this? I asked. He took the photograph only after I held it out to him. Baltimore. My pulse shifted. So that is you. The picture showed 12-year-old me sitting near a hotel hallway window, clutching a bottle of water like it contained all remaining hope on earth. At the edge of the frame stood a teenage boy with dark hair, keeping several feet between us. Adrian looked younger, obviously, but the posture was the same. Calm, careful, never crowding. I was 17, he said. I frowned. My mother said I was 12 here. You were. That makes you 5 years older. Correct. Good. Just confirming arithmetic still works tonight. Adrian handed the photograph back. You had left the main ceremony because the scent concentration was overwhelming you. A memory moved through me like light beneath water. Gray carpet, loud voices. Behind closed doors, a silver designation pin scratching against my collar. You brought me water. The vending machine charged $3 for it. I remember being offended. I laughed quietly. That sounds strangely familiar. Adrian leaned against the window frame, still giving me room. You told me everyone kept asking what kind of alpha you were going to become. More fragments returned. Adults smiling too brightly. People discussing schools, mentorships, alliances. Me wondering why a 12-year-old needed a 5-year plan. What did I say to you? Adrian's expression softened. You said you wished someone would look at you and see you, not what you were supposed to become. My throat tightened. For a second, the ballroom disappeared. I remembered the feeling more clearly than the words. Being watched by people who already had plans for me. Then this older boy sat across the hall and asked whether I wanted him to stay or leave. You did not try to make me go back inside, I said. You said you were not ready. And you listened. It seemed like a reasonable thing to do. I looked down at the photograph. Somehow that simple answer hurt more than a dramatic one would have. My parents had spent years deciding on my behalf because they believed they knew what was best. Adrian had been 17 and apparently understood the concept of asking permission. What happened afterward? I asked. My family left the next morning. A couple weeks later, I asked someone from the ceremony committee about you. He paused. They said your designation had been corrected and you were no longer in the Alpha registry. Corrected. The word tasted ridiculous now. Did you believe them? Eventually. That is not an answer. Adrian smiled faintly. No, not really. He looked toward the ballroom, then back at me. For a while I wondered whether I had misunderstood what happened that night. Then years passed. And today you smelled me. Eventually. That word caught my attention. Eventually? Adrian nodded. Caleb, I recognized your face before your blocker started failing. I stared at him. You recognized me after 11 years? Not immediately by name. But when you walked into the ballroom, I knew I had seen you somewhere important. His voice lowered. Then you touched your collar, and I remembered the boy in Baltimore doing the exact same thing with his designation pin. Something warm settled beneath my ribs, quieter than panic, harder to joke away. So it was not just the scent. No. His answer came without hesitation. The scent confirmed what I already suspected. I folded the photograph carefully and slipped it back into my pocket beside the silver pin and discarded blocker. That is inconvenient. Adrian raised an eyebrow. Why? Because I had prepared an entire argument about alpha instincts making you unreliable. You can still give it if you worked hard on it. I laughed. Maybe later. The music softened behind us. For the first time all evening, I did not feel like Adrian was looking at a designation, a family role, or a problem that needed solving. He was simply looking at me. What happens now, he asked. I thought about my parents, the trust, the testing I still needed, and the fact that tomorrow suddenly belonged to a version of me I had never met. I have no idea. Adrian nodded. That is allowed. I looked at him. You really believe that? Yes. Everyone else seems to have a plan. Then they can wait. Something in my chest loosened. Maybe recognition was not someone knowing exactly who you were. Maybe it was someone noticing you were still figuring it out and staying anyway. The private family meeting began 20 minutes after the last dance, which felt impressively efficient considering everyone had just spent several hours pretending weddings were about romance instead of legal documents. Emily and Daniel stayed in the ballroom, saying goodbye to guests while the rest of us moved into the smaller library beside the reception hall. My parents were there. Daniel's parents. 2 trustees from the Foster Family Trust. Several representatives from the Brooks family. Adrian and his father stood near the windows. And me, apparently, although Dad looked like he was reconsidering that part. Caleb does not need to be involved tonight, he said quietly to one of the trustees. I was standing 6 feet away. Still excellent hearing, I said. Dad closed his eyes briefly. Your designation has not been independently confirmed. True. I folded my arms. But that did not stop you from independently hiding it for 11 years. One trustee cleared his throat with the exhausted expression of a man who had expected signatures and received family therapy instead. Perhaps we should postpone the Foster-Brooks agreement until Mr. Foster's status is formally reviewed. Dad started to object. I did not. That sounds reasonable. Across the room, Adrian's father exchanged a few words with one of the Brooks representatives. Apparently, the evening also included discussion of future cooperation with the Cole family. Because naturally my identity crisis had developed a corporate subplot. A senior advisor turned toward Adrian. Your family's participation was expected to be discussed tonight as well. Adrian nodded. I know. Given the uncertainty, perhaps we should proceed with the arrangements that are unaffected. I noticed the word arrangements. Adrian noticed too. Which arrangements? He asked. The advisor hesitated. The partnership options previously discussed between the Cole family and several designated representatives. Adrian's expression remained polite. No. The room went quiet. His father looked at him, not angry, just curious. No. I will not enter an alliance tonight. Dad shifted beside me. This matter has nothing to do with Caleb. Adrian looked directly at him. It has everything to do with Caleb if the entire discussion assumes he must continue being treated as someone he is not. My pulse jumped. Adrian, I said quietly. He turned toward me immediately. I am not speaking for you. That mattered enough that I stopped. He looked back at the room. I am speaking for myself. I will not participate in an agreement that benefits from another person being excluded from his own identity. One of the Brooks representatives frowned. You cannot even be certain of his designation. Adrian's eyes returned to mine. I was certain enough 11 years ago. The room shifted. My mother went still. Dad looked sharply at him. Adrian continued before anyone could interrupt. I met Caleb at a youth designation ceremony in Baltimore. He was 12. I was 17. He had already presented as an alpha. I could feel every person in the room looking at me now. Public attention. My oldest enemy. Wonderful. Adrian did not move closer. His face is the reason I recognized him tonight, he said. His scent only confirmed what I remembered. Dad's voice became strained. A childhood memory is not evidence. Then wait for the independent testing. Adrian's answer was calm. That is what Caleb asked for. One trustee nodded slowly. Which means postponing the agreement is the appropriate action. Dad looked around the room and seemed to realize the decision was moving beyond his control. For once, I did not enjoy seeing him lose control. I just felt tired. Adrian turned toward me again. The room was silent enough that I could hear rain tapping against the windows. Caleb, he said, I recognized you tonight because I remembered you. But recognition does not give me authority over what happens next. My throat tightened. He held my gaze. I recognize you, but I do not get to define you. Something inside me settled into place. Not because Adrian had defended me. Not because a trustee finally agreed to wait. Because someone had just seen the difference between standing beside me and standing in front of me. I looked around the room at my parents, the representatives, the documents waiting on the long table, all the systems that had apparently been planning my future while I thought I was simply bad at crowded parties. Then I looked back at Adrian. Good, I said, because I am done letting other people do that. A quiet breath of laughter moved through the room, mostly from Adrian's father. Dad said my name, but I raised a hand. Tomorrow I get independent testing. After that, I read the trust myself. Then I decide whether I approve anything. The trustee nodded. That is your right if your designation is confirmed. And if it is not? I asked. Then the agreement can proceed under the existing terms. Great. Look at us using evidence. Adrian almost smiled. Mom looked at me with tears in her eyes, but she did not interrupt. Dad finally sat down. The meeting ended without signatures. No disaster. No ruined marriage. No collapsing family empire. Just a delay. It was almost funny how small the consequence was compared with the size of the lie that had prevented it. As everyone began leaving, Adrian stayed near the window. I walked over. You did not have to do that. I know. You keep saying that. It keeps being true. I smiled despite myself. You recognized me twice now. Adrian's expression softened. Maybe. Do not get ambitious. Would not dream of it. I looked toward the ballroom, where Emily was still laughing with Daniel beyond the open doors. Tonight had remained hers. Tomorrow would finally be mine. And for the first time, that did not feel frightening. It felt overdue. 3 weeks later, I had accumulated enough medical paperwork to qualify as my own filing cabinet. The independent clinic confirmed what the old records had already shown. I was an alpha, not potentially, not unusually sensitive, not a beta with complicated reactions. An alpha whose designation had been suppressed since I was 13. The specialist explained everything slowly, answered every question directly, and gave me copies of every result without making me ask twice. That alone nearly felt revolutionary. Emily learned the truth the morning after the wedding. She cried first, then became furious, then apologized for becoming furious because apparently she thought I had exclusive rights to emotional instability. Daniel stayed beside her looking increasingly horrified as I explained the trust agreement. Neither of them had known. That mattered. The Foster-Brooks agreement remained under review, but their marriage was completely untouched. Somehow the world had survived a delayed signature. I try not to mention that every time Dad called, my parents and I were still complicated. Mom apologized without defending herself, which helped. Dad took longer. His messages sounded like formal statements written by someone discovering emotions through legal counsel. I answered when I wanted to. Another revolutionary concept. I had also moved into a small apartment about 20 minutes from my old place. It had large windows, decent plumbing, and a kitchen counter currently supporting 4 unopened boxes because I had decided unpacking was a future version of me's responsibility. On Saturday morning, someone knocked. I smelled cedar before I reached the door. Show off, I muttered to my own nose. Adrian stood outside wearing jeans, a dark sweater, and none of the formal clothing I associated with family negotiations. He held 2 coffees. Peace offering? I asked. I was not aware we were fighting. Preventative diplomacy, then. He handed me 1 cup. Vanilla latte. I stared at it. How did you know? Emily. I need to review her confidentiality standards. Adrian smiled and waited until I stepped aside before entering. He still did that. Waited. Asked. Never assumed. I had begun noticing how rare that felt. We sat near the window while morning light stretched across the hardwood floor. On the kitchen counter lay the final unopened scent blocker from the box my mother had given me before the wedding. I had kept it for 3 weeks without knowing why. Adrian followed my gaze, but said nothing. The clinic told me I do not need those anymore, I said. How do you feel about that? Not what are you going to do? How do you feel? I picked up the packet. Honestly, weird. That seems reasonable. I wore these for 11 years. I turned it over in my hand. It is strange when something can be completely wrong for you and still feel familiar. Adrian nodded. Familiar and safe are not always the same thing. I looked at him. That was suspiciously wise. I practiced outside. I laughed. Then I dropped the blocker into the trash. No ceremony. No dramatic declaration. Just a soft sound against the empty container. It felt better that way. Adrian lifted his coffee. How is the trust situation? Still under review. I read the entire document myself. And my grandfather desperately needed an editor. Adrian laughed. I mean the agreement. I have not decided. I leaned back. And apparently everyone has discovered they can continue breathing while I take my time. Remarkable. We sat quietly for a moment. Then Adrian set his cup down. Can I ask you something? Depends how many trustees are involved. None. Promising start. He looked almost nervous, which was new enough to make me pay attention. Would you have dinner with me? I blinked. Dinner? Yes. Not an alliance dinner. No. No family representatives hiding behind a plant. I can check the restaurant beforehand. I smiled. You are learning. Adrian waited. Of course he did. I thought about Baltimore, the wedding, the library, and the strange comfort of being recognized by someone who never acted like recognition meant ownership. Yes, I said. His expression softened. Yes. 1 dinner. I pointed at him. And if anyone mentions voting shares before dessert, I am leaving. Understood. I picked up my coffee again. You know, I spent years thinking someone recognizing the real me would create a disaster. Adrian looked toward the discarded blocker, then back at me. Did it? I considered my new apartment, my sister still happily married, my parents learning to wait, and the future sitting unwritten in front of me. No, I said. It mostly created paperwork. He laughed. So did I? And that was the strange thing about finally being seen. It did not turn me into someone new. It simply gave me room to stop pretending I had ever been someone else.